Inhabitants of peach trees. This is Judge Dredd. Mama is not the law. I am the law.
For many people, the Pete Travis directed, Alex Garland scripted Dredd arrived and departed with little fanfare, and even less interest in a summer packed to the gills with blockbusters. Faced with mega opposition in the form of The Avengers, The Dark Knight Rises, The Amazing Spider-Man, Men in Black 3, and The Bourne Legacy, a mega-city-set cyberpunk thriller based on a niche comic book still suffering from the stink of its previous movie adaptation was always going to be a tough sell. But for those who ventured into their local cinema, they were certainly in for a treat. Dredd is a violent, brutal, and harsh film that abjures the trend for family-friendly summer fare in favor of brain-splattered floors and hollow-point entry wounds, supported by a cutthroat killer soundtrack that's bound to keep the heart rate up. The level of violence in Dredd is impressive and led to a number of cuts having to be made in the US to get an R rating, and censors elsewhere in the world slapping the highest ratings they could on a film. It's this total disregard for movie trends that made the film a breath of fresh air when it was first released, and allowed it to develop a feverish cult following whose demands for a Dredd 2 still echo on social media today. In terms of script, Dredd is a simplistic movie set around action set pieces, similar to Garth Evans' The Raid. Set in the near future, after a nuclear war has destroyed much of the planet, the remaining inhabitants are crammed into sprawling metropolises called megacities. Outside of these vast concrete jungles lies a wasteland filled with mutants and death. The megacities themselves don't fare much better, with violence and crime running rife, in part due to the squalid conditions and average unemployment rates of above 90%. The only thing stopping a total dystopian meltdown are the judges, a brutal form of law and order who serve as judge, jury, and executioner to society's ills. The movie Dredd follows a day in the life of legendary Judge Dredd, played by Karl Urban, as he's tasked with training the borderline failure new recruit and mutant Judge Anderson, played by Olivia Thirdbley. Things become tricky for the two protagonists when they respond to a series of murders in Peachtrees, a 200-story slum, and find themselves trapped by Lena Headey's vicious mama and her clan, with only one way to go: up. As I said, the script is simplistic, but the film shines due to excellent casting. Karl Urban is and always will be the law in my book.
Save me a lot of paperwork if you just confess right now.
An aesthetic that captures the look and feel of the comic books, and fantastic action sequences that drive the film and reveal the story and characters without the need for expansive exposition or dialogue. It's this use of action that I'm going to delve into by exploring the opening and final scenes of this underrated masterpiece. I should also point out that much like his comic book counterpart, we never see Dredd's face in the film. His face is either in shadow, or the top half of his face is obstructed by his helmet, which meant that Urban had to showcase his character with his hands tied behind his back. Yet, we learn more about who he is, and often what he's thinking, from a few reactionary grimaces in this film than we do with Sylvester Stallone in the entirety of the awful 90s adaptation.
So what happened in there?
Drug bust.
Looked like you've been through it.
Perps were uncooperative.
How many times have you watched a film only to see a character lazily introduced by lengthy exposition or dialogue that tells you little about who they are or what motivates them? Being told that somebody is the best at what they do, or are pure evil, or whatever the filmmakers want you to believe about the character, doesn't make you believe that about the character. Dredd is a cold and unrelenting badass, but the film doesn't need to tell us that. In fact, excluding a small nod to how the other judges see him later in the movie, nobody bangs the Dredd drum or extols his virtues.
1 million credits.
Million?
You have a problem with the judge. You know who he is?
No.
I do.
We don't need to be told that Dredd is a badass, because we see it within the first few minutes of the film. The bike chase through the vast metropolitan sprawl of Megacity 1, culminating in the shopping mall shootout, and one hotshot losing his head, is all we need to understand who Dredd is. A good action sequence like the Dredd bike chase and mall confrontation allows the filmmakers to stay away from boring exposition and reveal Dredd through action. This sequence introduces the audience to his character and reveals his traits and flaws, and how these determine his decisions. In the opening scene of the film, we're introduced to the bad guys driving recklessly and taking drugs, with Dredd in relentless pursuit. Dredd is immediately shown as a tough mother as he speeds through the streets as bullets rain in from in front of him. The reaction of the criminals when they see his bike bearing down on them tells us all we need to know about the dynamic between them. They're scared, and they understand how high the stakes have become. Dredd is determined, unflinching, and brutal. When asked if he needs backup, he replies with no. He's not a hero in the typical sense, and shows little in the way of emotion. This leads into the confrontation as the bad guys and Dredd tear across the city with little regard for those around them. Even when innocent bystanders are mowed down, Dredd doesn't stop and plows on in a single-minded quest for justice. His character is shown to be both unflinching and relentless as he reports the deaths with little emotion, just a determined,
"Perps just wiped out an innocent, I'm taking him down."
The confrontation continues on foot as the last surviving perp takes a mall worker hostage. Dredd and the criminal trade verbal blows, with the perp insisting that he has the upper hand. We know that he doesn't. The look on Dredd's face and his flippant words of,
"Yeah, I heard you, hotshot,"
when the hostage is threatened, tells us everything we need to know. Dredd isn't going to lose the situation. He's too tough and too experienced. One well-placed incendiary round to the bad guy's mouth later, and the payoff is complete. And Dredd is cemented in the audience's minds as a character of an uncompromising nature, who is both brutal and single-minded in his moral code. When the woman thanks him for saving her life, he doesn't care. Saving her life wasn't his goal. Stopping the bad guy was, because he was breaking the law. By saving the woman, Dredd isn't being compassionate or heroic. He's fulfilling his duty as a judge, the same way that shooting the perp with a hotshot was. When the woman thanks him, you can see that she's just as scared of Dredd as she was of the man who held a gun to her head. The purpose of the law in the future isn't to save people, it's to punish wrongdoers. Dredd is fantastic at his job, and punishment is what he excels at. His relentless nature and single-minded vision of justice are set up within these first few action-packed minutes, and his character never wavers as the film progresses. The violence that we see in the opening and the violence that is yet to come carries weight as it's grounded in character and services the world building. We immediately understand the harsh realities of the world he lives in are the reason Dredd is the way that he is. Dredd doesn't go through massive changes in the film and is relatively the same throughout, but he, Anderson, and Mama are also well defined that when they're thrown in the meat grinder together, their interactions drive the compelling action. As the narrative unfolds, Dredd and Anderson are both physically and psychologically pushed to their limits. They take on a literal army of gangs, judges that have been corrupted, and must scale over 200 floors to reach their target.
And as for you, Mama, judgment time.
It might seem weird to spend the majority of this article talking about an opening action sequence and then to skip to the end, but Dredd's final confrontation with Mama is where we finally get to see the payoff for all of Dredd's actions. I could probably pick out dozens of other action sequences in the movie that highlight Dredd's character, but in the final few minutes, as he fights his way to floor 200, his relentless dedication to serving justice is hammered home, and his final confrontation with Mama has only one possible outcome. Mama is, in many ways, very similar to Dredd. She's just as ruthless and uncompromising as he is, but through a twist of fate is on the other side of the law. They exist in a brutal world where bad things happen to everyone, whether they're perpetrated by drug dealers or the law. Dredd represents control, and Mama, reckless abandon. Both Dredd and Mama also dispense what they perceive as justice, and function as judges in their own right. As I mentioned in my video last week on why the Joker is the perfect antagonist for Batman, both the protagonist and antagonist need to be fighting for the same thing. We see this at play here again, with Dredd and Mama fighting for control over Peachtree's and its 75,000 inhabitants. In this case, Dredd is the unstoppable force to Mama's immovable object. Mama, similarly to Dredd, is revealed by her actions. Let's compare the introductory scenes to both characters. While Dredd is focused, angry, ruthless, and most importantly, in control, probably the only thing holding him back from going apeshit, Mama is first seen enjoying a hit of slow-mo, encapsulating the very essence of reckless abandon. She is the fearless and carefree yin to his draconian yang. Admittedly, we have a little bit more exposition spoken about her in respect to how she became the kingpin of Peachtree's, but her ruthlessness is mostly shown to us through what she does. She never flinches when ordering people to be skinned alive, and her lack of care for the people around her is cemented when she destroys a large part of Peachtree's in a failed attempt to kill the two judges with high-caliber mounted machine guns. By the end of the film, we understand that neither Mama nor Dredd are capable of relenting, and only one of them is going to walk away. When Dredd finally reaches Mama, she informs him that a device has been attached to her wrist monitoring her vital signs, and if her heartbeat were to cease beating, the entire top complex rigged with explosives would detonate. In response to this, Dredd simply shoots Mama, forces her to consume slow-mo, and throws her off the top floor, reasoning that by the time she'd reached the ground and died, the sensor would be out of range for the explosives. Did Dredd really know the bomb wouldn't go off? Probably not. But were we ever in any doubt that Mama was going to fly? Dredd had his target, and he wasn't going to let a little thing like her blowing them all up stop him from dispensing justice. By this stage in the proceedings, Dredd had shown time and time again that justice was his only driving force. His actions and reactions to the things that happened around him were focused on one thing: bringing Mama and her clan to justice. Nothing else mattered. He wouldn't be reasoned with in the opening mall standoff, and he sure as hell wasn't going to be reasoned with now.
You ready?
Yes, sir.
You don't look ready.
Just adrenaline, sir.
While the addition of Anderson made sense from an adaptation standpoint, with Anderson often featured as a trusted sidekick of Dredd in the comics, her role in the film also structurally complements his character. She's almost the exact polar opposite of him in every way imaginable. While Dredd's face is covered by his helmet, she removes hers for the entirety of the film as it interferes with her psychic ability. She is short while he's tall, she's petite and he's broad, and she's also brand new to being a judge, functioning as an audience surrogate to the proceedings that is taken aback by the ruthless and callous nature of the role she's been thrust into, while Dredd is a seasoned professional that isn't bothered by the work he does. During the beginning, she follows his every move. Fearing the failure of her assessment, she often dispenses judgments that align with his cold worldview instead of what she herself believes to be right. But by the end, when she loses her gun and technically fails the assessment, she is freed from the constraints of the mentor-mentee relationship. She develops some agency of her own and goes against his recommended judgment to enact compassionate justice that takes more of the circumstances into consideration.
And I don't need to be a mind reader to know it. He's a victim, not a perp.
By the rules set out by Dredd when he first took Anderson under his wing, there is no doubt that the rookie judge failed. So why did Dredd give her a pass? Dredd was single-minded in his pursuit of dispensing judgment, but Anderson wasn't a criminal. She was his partner, and she'd also saved his life. Giving her a pass wasn't against his code. It was a reward for her work during the assault on Mama's fortress, and his way of acknowledging that she would be a powerful ally, as she is in the comics. Anderson was a talented psychic that was tough in her own right, and she actually led the final charge into Mama's stronghold, much to the surprise of Dredd. Passing her would arguably have aided with the pursuit of justice. In fact, having the power to read people's minds gives her a unique ability to dispense true justice, something that Dredd could never truly do. This is why at the end, when asked what his assessment of her was, he simply answers with,
"She's a pass."
Anderson shows him that there is a way to be a better judge and changes him, although ever so slightly, for the better.
Ready?
Yeah.
You look ready.
With that having been said, that's all for today, folks. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification icon to stay up to date on all my content, and if there's anything else you'd like to request, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Nihat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.